Hello, I'm going to go over some tips for completing the second assessment for engaging with external agencies. So let me just share my screen. Okay, so here we are in the Brightspace site, and I've gone to assessment information, and what we're interested in here is TMA2, Tutor Marked Assessment 2. So there's a range of things that you have here to look at. So first off, you've got the assessment brief. I will return to that in a minute. I want to cover the other things that are here first. So we have an external supervisor review. So this is a document which you can use to get some feedback from your external supervisor. And obviously you can use that feedback when you're writing up your assessment. You can use it to support claims you're making about the way you performed and the learning objectives that you've managed to achieve. Just a couple of things about this document. It's kind of been designed along the lines of the sorts of appraisals or performance reviews that are used in organisations generally, and most of these have this self-assessment element where they ask the employee, if it was somebody employed, to assess their own performance before the supervisor or manager has a meeting with them to discuss their progress. So you've got an opportunity here to add in your own comments. So my advice would be to do that before you present this document to the person that you've been working with on your project or in your placement. Ideally would be if you can actually arrange to have a meeting with them. So you have a performance review meeting, because then you're going to get you're going to have the opportunity to ask questions and get a lot more in-depth information about their views of what you've been doing, and their views on what you could be doing in terms of continuing professional development in the future. So ideally you have a meeting and they would then complete their part of it afterwards. So they have the opportunity to comment, and we've also got a kind of a tick box thing at the end as well. So what I would do is advise you to make sure you do that before you finish your placement or your project, because it can be a bit difficult going back and asking for it afterwards. So let's just go back from there. So we've just looked at the external supervisor review. Let's also look at the progress log template. So I will have talked about this before. This is an example that you can use. You can design your own if you feel that would work better for you. You need to keep a note of what's going on whilst you're doing your placement, doing your project. You need to be able to go back and recall what happened when, and how you reacted to it and what you learned from it. And we're human beings. We don't remember these things unless we write them down. Some people do, but most people don't. So this is an example that you could use to keep a track of what's happening while you're doing your placement or project. So you can use it for keep it for your own use. Write down your initial reflections, write down how you felt. So we've talked about reflective learning and the importance of your initial reactions to something. You are asked to include a progress log within your assessment submission. It could be the one that you did as you went along, or it could be you might want to go back in and kind of sanitize it or expand on it, or rewrite it. Entirely up to you. And this, as I said, is just an example of what you could use in terms of a progress log. So what else have we got here? We have a marking rubric. I'll just click on it briefly. absolutely no way you can see that on your screens. It's much too small, but please do go back in, download it. It's an Excel spreadsheet similar to the marking rubric that is in use for the first assessment. It gives you a good indication of what you've got to make sure you've included in order to get the grade that you're seeking. So please use that as a check before you submit your assessment. And then finally, we've got the upload area. Please don't forget that you need to have completed the cover sheet and attach that to the front of your assessment or upload it separately, but it does need to be there. Okay, let's jump into the actual assessment brief, and I'll talk through kind of what we're expecting you to cover at each section. Right, so I've just flipped to the actual Word document. So you should be able to see that okay in here. So it's got standard cover sheet. You need to submit that, tick all the boxes, usual stuff. Scrolling down. Okay, so we've got the various sections and you've got some guidance here. So you don't have to follow this slavishly, but it gives you a bit of guidance as to what you should include. So to start off, presentation-wise, if we scroll back up, it does say it's looking for a report style presentation. So that's what would be preferred. For a report, you need a cover sheet, you need a contents page, and then you need headings within your document. Not an essay. There's no rules about what you can include. If you want to put images in, you can use appendices. In fact, I'd strongly encourage you to use appendices. But the whole thing should kind of hang together as a report. So you're aiming to demonstrate critical thinking and reflection. This assessment is not just about describing what happened. It needs to go way beyond that. You need to be able to analyze what happened, critically assess it, evaluate it, and draw conclusions from it. So, introduction. So, a brief introduction to the external agency, who whatever organization or individual you've been working with, a description of what your role has been, you know, briefly what you've been doing. And this is the point where you could refer the reader to the progress log, which you've put in the appendices. So remember who's reading this. Don't start off with a load of acronyms, don't make assumptions, assume that the person reading it may have read your first assessment, but doesn't actually know about the organisation in any depth. So brief background to the organisation. You can refer back to assessment 1. Don't repeat everything you put in assessment 1. You don't have the word count for that. But it needs to be a rounded enough introduction that somebody picking it up and reading it can say, oh, right, okay, yes, I can see, you know, where this person was and what they did. I've got an understanding of how they, you know, what they were doing fitted in with the bigger picture. You can use appendices. You can put in links as well. So give as good an introduction as you can. Okay, so 10 marks for that, which is not insignificant. So moving on to the first chunky bit of the report, we're looking for an evaluation of your performance on the project. So it's helpful perhaps to restate the objectives that you had in assessment 1. You know, what was it you were going to be doing? How were you going to perhaps add value to the organization? So if you restate those objectives, you can assess how far did you achieve them? Were there difficulties and challenges? You were asked in assessment 1 to kind of set out what you thought were going to be the difficulties and the challenges. Did they happen? How did you overcome them? What value did you provide? What did you achieve? So this is not specifically about your learning objectives. That's going to be the next section. This is how did you meet the objectives that the organization wanted you to do? So very much here you can use the external supervisor review, which you'll have in the appendices, but you can also use other pieces of evidence about the about what you achieved. So you can use examples of your work. You could put in photographs. You could put in extracts from reports you produced. So anything that will kind of support what you're saying would be useful in this particular section. So what you're not looking for is a step-by-step description of what you did. This whole report should be reflective. It should be a critical reflection. So you're only putting in enough description so that you can then continue with your critical assessment of your achievements. Bear with me a minute. I have a cat that is being a bit of a pain. I can figure out how. I'm just going to stop this for just a moment. Sorry about this. Right, my apologies. That's me back, and the cat's locked outside the room. Okay, so I think the final thing on this section 2 evaluation is that you don't have to, but you could use one of the reflective models that we talked about when we were talking about reflective learning in this section. It might help you to structure your reflection and how you write this section up. So I'm going to move on to the next section now, learning objectives. And here I think it is very useful for you to be using a reflective learning model, because that's exactly what you're doing. You're focusing very much on what you've learnt as a part of the process. So just to reiterate, section 2, you're looking at what you achieved in terms of what you set out to do, or what the organisation wanted you to do, in terms of helping them achieve their overall aims and objectives. In section 3, you're going back to the first assessment and you're picking out the specific learning objectives that you had for yourself. And you are, again, critically reflecting on how far you've gone to achieve them and what you still need to focus on in terms of your personal development. So you've hopefully got these learning objectives from the first assessment, but word count is tight as usual. So you might have to choose what to focus on, which specific learning objectives do you want to deal with, because it is important to try and evaluate them in some depth. So it would be better to pick 2 or 3 key things and actually focus on them at as deep a level as you possibly can, rather than giving this a general sort of overview of all the learning that you undertook. And when you're doing it, think about putting it in context. Think about how it links in with your previous experience. Think about how you felt, how that contributed to your learning, how you're gonna contextualize that learning going forward. What is it actually gonna lead to in terms of your planning, in terms of your future career? So this is a great opportunity, actually. It's really good to have an assessment that you can write about you, about your progress, and about your plans for the future. So you know, make sure you choose what to focus on, and bring in as much sort of data as you can, examples to support the evidence that you're giving about the learning you've achieved, but also, you know, what that means for you in the context of your future career or continuing learning. And then we come to the last section of your report, which is your conclusion and recommendations. You need to be very clear here what, obviously, a conclusion, you're doing a summary of your reflection, but you really need to clearly highlight what are the key things, that the outcomes of this, the key things that you've learned, and exactly how is this going to impact on your learning for the future. So, and your future professional development, what sort of things are you going to do? You could even, and you know, it would be a great thing if you could produce a continuing professional development plan, which you may put in the appendices, and this is the point where you might refer to that. So this is the opportunity to kind of sum up everything that's gone on with your placement or your project, and what that is going to mean to you in terms of your ongoing development. So just a couple of things about presentation. As I said before, report format, make sure you're using appendices. Think about what else you can put in beyond the ones that we've suggested are mandatory. Referencing goes without saying. There should be correct referencing. You need all the way through to be putting what you're saying into the wider context. So whilst the academic referencing, if I say academic in inverted commas, is likely to come from texts on reflective learning, or career development, or the process of learning, the bulk of your references are probably going to come from industry sources, or from the organization you're working for. But I certainly, you know, want to see the outside world coming in at various points to that context and also support everything that you're saying within this piece of work. Just stop sharing that. I think that's all I've got to say. Sorry again about the feline interruption in the middle of it. I hope that's helpful, but always you can contact me by email if you need any extra support or have any questions. Thanks a lot.